Hi, great to have you at our Go Global event. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you may be joining us today. My name is Ju, and I'm a Play Partnerships Manager based in Seoul, Korea. My role is to help devs find opportunities and grow their business on Google Play in whichever market they may be interested in. On that front, I'm extremely excited to open this Go Global event on emerging markets. Hopefully, many of you have joined us in our Go Global series throughout the year, where we have brought insights from many markets over the world and highlighted gaming and user trends and shared best practices so that you are better prepared, whether you are contemplating entry or already have strong presence in a particular market. Today is no exception, and we have prepared sessions covering multiple markets, so we hope you find it all the more informative and interesting. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. So during the webinar, please do not record or share any of this content on social networks. If you have any questions, please type it in the Q&A box at the side of this screen or log on to slido.com with event code #GoEmerging. And given the event is online, these questions will really help us make this session more interactive, so don't be shy. We will be addressing your questions in the Q&A session later on. Also, as always, we look forward to your feedback, as that is what makes these sessions better. So please don't hold back and help us by responding to the survey, where the link will be provided at the end of today's session. Now that we've taken care of the logistics, let me move to what's most important, what we're going to cover today. We are really happy and appreciative that you have joined us. And in the first session, Ash and Rogers, who will introduce themselves later, will kick off the day bringing you to emerging markets and what makes us so excited about them. Then Hemin from our growth consulting team will share market and gamer insights from emerging markets utilizing Play data. And then our product colleague will talk about Play's efforts to accelerate your expansion into these markets. Nimrod will speak about approaches to win in these markets. And in the emerging markets import discussion, we plan to go a bit deeper, asking our import specialists to address general questions that have been commonly raised before. And then finally, we will address the questions you have left throughout today in the Q&A session. So please feel free to ask anything that you have been curious about in the box on the side, or go to slido.com #GoEmerging. Okay, I've spoken a lot, but without further ado, let me hand it over to Ash, who will start our introduction to emerging markets. It's all yours, Ash.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Ju, for the introduction, and thank you all for taking the time to join today's session. My name's Ash, and I'm a partnerships manager at Google Play. More specifically, I lead Google Play's Go India and Southeast Asia programs, helping developers like yourself grow your business in those markets. I'm really excited to get this chance to share more about what we're seeing in emerging markets with all of you. So let's get started. If there's one thing we want you to take away from today's webinar, it is that emerging markets have, well, emerged for gaming. They are no longer some opportunity for the distant future. You can and should have a big business there today. Emerging markets is also where most of your growth for our industry will come from for the next 5 to 10 years. That is a really big shift, and one that is going to have a massive impact on all of your businesses, but also on gaming as a whole in the years to come. Today, we will explain why we're so bullish on emerging markets, and also what you should do about this opportunity. Emerging markets encompasses 68% of the world's population, and that's not counting China as an emerging market. If we counted China, the number would be 86%. Now, what do I mean when I say emerging markets? We typically think of countries with relatively low GDP per capita. In Asia, this is countries like India, Indonesia, Thailand. It includes all of Africa, a number of countries in the Middle East, and Central and Eastern Europe, and finally, also all of Latin America. If you weren't impressed by the fact that emerging markets have 68% of today's world population, well, hopefully you will be surprised to hear that they're estimated to grow by 700 million people by 2030. That is 94% of the world's population growth between 2020 and 2030. For all intents and purposes, that's all the growth. Now, you might be thinking, that's great. I really want to reach these, 6 billion potential users that are going to be in emerging markets by 2030. But there are a lot of emerging markets out there. How am I going to reach them all? Well, actually, that population is pretty concentrated. Take the BRIN markets, for instance. Those are a great place to start. Now, more people are great, but I'm sure some of you are thinking, those people need smartphones to be able to play games. And you'd be right about that. But you also don't need to worry about that. Emerging markets users already have 3 billion plus smartphones today and make up more than half of all smartphone users globally. Here we will see the scales tip further in favor of emerging markets even faster, with emerging markets moving up to 4.5 billion devices by just 2025. And that's 75% of the growth between now and then. Again, those devices are pretty concentrated. If we pick just the top 25 countries, you would have 2.5 times as many devices as are in all the mature countries put together. I'm sure many of you would have seen a slide like this from We're Social, which looks at average time spent using the internet on a smartphone. I really look forward to it every year and love to refresh it and kind of see where the numbers come out. And I'm always kind of shocked. I mean, the world average today is about 3.5 hours. And now look to the left of that, and you see countries like India, Morocco, UAE, Thailand, Brazil, essentially a bunch of emerging markets averaging over 4 hours per day. And if you look to the right, it's pretty much all mature markets. People often expect the opposite. But when you think about it, this trend is not at all surprising. Users in emerging markets are mobile first and mobile only. So naturally, they will spend more time on their smartphones. They don't have as many alternatives. But it's the gap between emerging markets and mature markets that's really amazing to me. Anyway, the key takeaway here is emerging markets don't just have more users. Those users are also likely to be more engaged users. Just one more reason for you to prioritize them. So we made a case for people, devices, engagement in emerging markets. What's left? Oh, right, money. Are emerging markets economies growing strong and growing fast? Well, again, the answer is an overwhelming yes. Emerging markets GDP is forecast to grow 2.6x between 2010 and 2030. At that rate, by 2030, emerging markets GDP will roughly match that of mature markets. I don't know about you, but I think at that point, we really need to drop the emerging markets name because they will have pretty clearly emerged. Okay, and with that, over to you, Rogers, to talk about mobile gaming.
Thank you, Ash. Hey, everybody, I'm Rogers, Games BD from Latin America, and I also lead the Go Latam program. So let's get started. I'm excited to be here. So like Ash just explained, not surprisingly, with all those tailwinds, rising population, GDP, and smartphone penetration, it's not a surprise that mobile games revenue is also climbing. You don't have to take our word for it. We do have Newzoo data here showing us that in 2020, emerging markets were already at $16 billion in revenue versus mature markets at $41 billion. That is an increase of 166% compared to 2016 versus 71% for mature markets. And by 2024, it is expected that emerging markets will have closed that gap considerably at $27 billion versus $49 billion. 69% versus 19%. So after seeing all these numbers, it will not be a surprise if in some years we see that emerging markets have already closed the gap. One of the reasons many of us consider that emerging markets are basically we underestimate them is because we are used to seeing gaming market like we see in mature markets, where console and PC are a lot bigger and mobile games are only 38% of games revenue. But that is not the case. In emerging markets, we do see that console and PC are a lot smaller, and actually mobile games are the star with 60% of the game's revenue. Another misconception is that in emerging markets, we sometimes expect them to behave just like mature markets, but delayed. And that is not the case, especially in banking and payments. In mature markets, what we usually see is a user is unbanked, then this person gets a bank account, gets a credit card, and that unlocks online spending, right? So in emerging markets, what we do see is sometimes users get being unbanked for a little longer. Then when they start to get bank accounts, instead of jumping to credit cards, they actually get e-wallets. And that unlocks online spending directly, like skipping the credit cards at all. That is sometimes called leapfrogging, that is jumping straight to the end. It doesn't mean that in emerging markets we don't have credit cards, but actually that they are not the most important form of payment by far. Brazil, as an example where I currently live, lots of people can get a credit card, but they will not have lots of limit on that. So this pretty much doesn't solve any issue. We're now going to take a look at some supposed bottlenecks and why they are actually not bottlenecks, or at least getting a lot better. They are not as severe as they were in the past. So first, emerging market users have low-end devices. Basically, it is true that lots of users are going to save money when buying devices, which means devices are going to be cheaper, but not necessarily that handicap in terms of performance. In Latin America, most devices are going to have more or equal to 2 gigabytes of RAM, and in markets like Southeast Asia, virtually all devices have that. Connectivity is challenging and expensive in emerging markets. This is true in Africa for sure, and in many emerging markets, users are going to try and save data because it can be expensive. But it's not true for every single market as well. Markets like India have the lowest data cost and highest mobile data consumption in the world. Next one, emerging markets users won't pay for digital content. And this is actually not true. Emerging markets now drive the majority of buyers in play globally, and we do know that the majority of new paying users come from emerging markets every day. It is proven that the users are going to spend in gaming IAP. Next one, pay-to-win games cannot do well in emerging markets. It is certainly less common in emerging markets, but it's not rare to see pay-to-win games actually in top positions in top grossing charts in emerging markets. What is important is that those games provide a good experience for users that don't spend or spend less. Next one, it is too expensive to localize the game for all those markets. And yeah, localization can be expensive, but it's getting cheaper every single day. And text localization is actually cheap if you consider it. Even in games like RPGs that are content heavy, have lots of text, and sometimes even have voiceovers, it is okay to start with localized subtitles because, of course, voiceovers are going to be expensive and more difficult, but subtitles are totally fine. And the next one, can't work with local services and partners due to the language barrier. Of course, if you do know how to speak the local language, that is going to be a plus because everybody is going to be able to talk to you. But it is very common, and pretty much every market is going to have agencies and intermediaries to help you in English and sometimes even other languages. So this is not as big as an issue as it was in the past. And with that, allow me to introduce you to Haiming Ji, growth consultant in Google Play.
Thank you, Rogers and Ash, for handing the presentation over to me. We'll start my presentation now. Hi, everyone. My name is Hemit, and I'm a growth consultant from Google Play's growth consulting team. As a growth consultant, my team and I work with games developers and provide relevant data insights and consultations to ensure success of the developers. I'll share some data insights about emerging markets today and their gamers through the lens of Google Play data. As the other speakers mentioned before me, the markets that we look into today consist of countries with relatively low GDP per capita, and specifically during my session, I will break these markets into Southeast Asia, India, MENA, LATAM, and Russia. So emerging markets have been becoming increasingly bigger contributors to Google Play's global business. When you look at the top 20 grossing markets on Play, 8 markets out of 20 are emerging markets, and MPUs, new paying users to Google Play in emerging markets, have been rapidly growing as well. The number doubled in the last 2 years and keep growing, especially as users who are especially 18 to 24 men get their first smartphones and make their first mobile gaming purchases. If we look at each market and regions in terms of YOY compared to global YOY growth, we see a faster growth than the overall global market growth in most of these emerging markets, except for MENA region. India is growing the fastest with the 4.5x growth compared to the global average. LATAM comes next with 3.4x, and Russia at 1.8x, SEA is at 1.5x, and MENA is at 0.8x. Since the global average includes all the other fastest growing market numbers, I would say that it's also safe to say MENA's growth is also steady and strong. But yes, I guess these numbers feel a little bit unreal for some of you, considering that overall monetization performance of individual titles you've probably seen or heard. But contrary to popular beliefs, we have been seeing more and more titles that are monetizing successfully in these emerging markets. Number of unique titles exceeding 1% monthly buyer penetration has almost tripled in just the last 2 years, and the growth has been consistent since 2017, even if we go back in time even further. I know we're all thinking of a few hit titles when we think of these emerging markets, but we do witness successful monetization happening beyond the well-known hit titles. As much as we see high potential in these markets in the future, we see other interesting patterns in these markets. We looked at user engagement data in global markets and compared these markets to each other with a statistical comparison method called cosine similarity. Right now, we're looking at how much these markets are similar to the US market to do a relative comparison. And greener the color is, the market's more similar to the US. And the more red it is, the market is more different to the US. Basically, you can assume that similar colored markets are similar in terms of the user engagement patterns. And we see that some of the emerging markets actually show quite similar patterns to the US or other mature markets that a lot of the developers prioritize. For example, possible pairs with high similarity are US, India, and Saudi Arabia, and another possible pairing is Western Europe and SEA markets. We also looked at the user spending patterns with the same method and relative to the US market. For the users' spending patterns, we see the groupings with similar markets such as Korea, Japan, Russia, SEA, and Saudi Arabia. And the second grouping could be Western Europe and Brazil. These groupings can be a good reference points for you when trying to decide testing markets for your primary target markets, especially since these emerging markets generally cost much less for user acquisition. For example, markets with similar engagement pattern are good options to test your title's engagement performance during open beta tests. And markets with similar monetization patterns are also good options for soft launch if you soft launch in several markets and would like to test for monetization. For both of the engagement and spending pattern analysis, we're looking at a general pattern. So if we actually deep dive into specific genres, there could be different grouping as well, which we could take offline for further discussions through our business consultations with your BDMs. Now, let's look at who these emerging market gamers are and what devices that they are using. In terms of gender, MENA and India are the markets that heavily skew to male users. 70 to 75% gamers are male in these markets, and among these gamers, buyers also heavily skew to male users, especially in India. Almost 90% of the buyers were male in India. Latin, SCA, and Russian gamers showed different distribution in that 40 to 50% of the gamers were female, but the buyer population still skew heavily to male population, at least 70% of the buyers coming from the male gamers. As we all know, male gamers dominating the buyer population is not a unique pattern in emerging markets. It's a very common pattern that we see in most of the gaming markets. In terms of age, 18 to 24 age group was the largest gamer and buyer group in India, SEA, and LATAM countries, which is very different from mature markets like US, Western Europe, or Korea, Japan, since a lot of these countries have more gamers and buyers in older age groups. And especially 18 to 24 buyers population is almost insignificant compared to buyers from older age groups. We actually see similar patterns to those mature markets in Russia and MENA, in that we have the largest group of buyers at age 25 to 34, but it's still noticeable that 18 to 24 follows as the second largest buyer group in these markets. In terms of the number of users, 18 to 24 is also the largest group in MENA. Now, let's quickly look at what kind of devices our emerging markets users are using. To have a reference point, I also brought overall US market data here. So in DPI spec, blue is the lowest spec with 320 DPI, and the red is the second lowest with 480 DPI. We clearly see, except for Russia, 320 DPI devices dominate emerging market devices. RAM specs also tell us a very similar story. The blue color is the lowest spec with 1 GB RAM. Red, yellow, green, orange, and sky blue follows. 1 GB RAM, blue barely shows up on US chart, but all present in emerging markets. This does not mean that the devices with higher RAM specs do not exist in emerging markets. We actually do see all colors in all these emerging markets. I don't have the data here, but when I pull out the same data for other mature markets, and especially Asia markets, we barely see 1 GB or 2 GB RAM devices, and the largest portion is actually in 6 GB devices sometimes. So these data points tell us that device optimization is a must if you're a developer who have been focusing on mature markets, but now looking to expand into these emerging markets. Okay then, what games our emerging market users are playing then? Let's look at the top store categories and their performance. I listed out top 5 categories by installs in our emerging markets, and action, casual, arcade are within top 5 installs category in our emerging markets. This is actually a common trend in other mature markets as well. We see these categories very often in top 5 installs categories, which suggests that the hit titles also gain popularity in these emerging markets. Now, let's see in which categories that these users are spending the most. Action and casual, with their high number of installs, also come into the top 5 user spend categories in all these emerging markets. In addition to this, strategy category was also always within top 5, and was even #1 in Russia. So how are these high monetizing categories performing in these emerging markets? If we start off with primary monetization metrics, ARPDAU and buyer percentage, strategy category shows the highest ARPDAU amongst these three categories in emerging markets. Action category showed the highest buyer percentage, that was near 0.5%, and casual has the lowest performance in both of these two metrics. Moving on to secondary monetization metrics, we see that the strategy comes in first in both of these metrics, which explains why they come in as one of the top 5 revenue generating categories in all emerging markets. Although casual categories had a low ARPDAU and buyer percentage, it actually performs higher than action categories in terms of ARPPU and average transaction value, and action performs the lowest. Considering that the action category was the highest revenue generating category and installed category, this tells us that action titles have been successfully implementing a monetization strategy that convert large portion of users at a low price point and benefit from massive user base. ARPDAU performance of casual genre was lower than action and strategy, but these also benefit from high volume of users as they come in as #2 or #3 installed categories in these emerging markets. Moving on to engagement metrics, DAU MAU and minutes per DAU. We see around 20% DAU MAU for all categories, which means that players log into the games 5 to 6 days a month. In terms of average daily play minutes, action is at the highest, which was around 70 minutes, and strategy was around 40 minutes, casual at around 30 minutes. As for the retention, Google Play looked at day 1 as the day that the users newly installed and opened the app, and we looked at the day 2 and day 28 retention in this regard. As expected, with the high ARPPU and ARPDAU in strategy category, we see the lowest retention in strategy. Action and casual have a similar level of D2 retention, but action category shows slightly higher D28 retention. Lastly, we also look at early lifetime value of these categories, week 1 and month 1 lifetime value, with day 1 as the day user installed and opened the app. We actually see that week 1 lifetime value is around the same level as these categories ARPDAU, but seems like strategy category monetizes the players the fastest, as it exceeds its ARPDAU the fastest. Casual is the slowest in terms of monetization speed. Okay, so with all these data, what are the key takeaways for emerging markets? We saw high potential in investing in emerging markets future with their fast growth, and especially as the largest gamer group, 18 to 24 age group, get their first smartphones and make their first mobile gaming purchases. As for the opportunity that are present right now, these markets are also good options for cheaper testings as we observe the similarities between the emerging markets and mature markets and identified similar market groupings. Secondly, yes, currently we all know very well that per user monetization is well behind mature markets, but as we witnessed that number of titles categories and strategy titles do show the highest monetization performance, even though their user base is much smaller than other two. But this general category trend is not unique to emerging markets. We do see similar tendencies in these categories also from mature markets. Most importantly, Google Play and Growth Consulting team is always looking to support all of you here today. So we could only go over the very general trend of emerging markets today during this session. But please feel free to reach out to your BDMs for support that will be customized to your needs when you're looking to expand to emerging markets. And thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you in a bit during the Q&A. Over to you, Elena.
Thanks, Haiming, for sharing the emerging market landscape insights. My name's Elena Chan, and I'm a product manager working on Google Play. I've helped scale Google Play's loyalty program, Google Play Points, to 5 continents and hundreds of participating developers to date. Emerging market has always been a key pillar of Google Play's strategy. Today, I'm going to take you through some exciting recent investments at Play in emerging markets, including onboarding many new forms of payments, launching a new product called prepaid plans, and expanding Play Points into emerging markets. In 2021, we launched 13 new local forms of payments in 11 emerging markets across different regions. Play users now has access to more than 300 local payment methods in over 70 markets and international cards in over 190 markets around the world, including many emerging markets. We have also lowered the minimum prices developer can set for paid apps, in-app purchases, and subscriptions on Play in many markets around Latin America, EMEA, and APAC to offer more pricing flexibility. In addition to form of payments, we have also launched prepaid plans, which you can think of as a non-renewing subscription. Prepaid plans will allow you to offer users access to content for a fixed amount of time, similar to auto-renewing subscriptions today. As the user approaches the expiration date on their plan, Play will notify the user and offer them to top up and extend. In this way, prepaid plans are a new way for users to pay for content, where we are blending the concept of a one-time purchase, where the user is always in session for the purchase, with entitlement duration from auto-renewing subscriptions. We think introducing prepaid plans will generate value for you in 2 key ways. 1, through user research, we find that prepaid plans or pay-as-you-go payment models are popular with certain groups of users, particularly in India and Southeast Asia, where auto-renewing payments are less common. Some of these users may be more likely to convert with a prepaid plan offer than a subscription. 2, there are certain popular forms of payment on Google Play that do not support auto-renewing purchases today, such as UPI in India or Cash in Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. These users simply cannot purchase your content if it's offered as a subscription. By introducing prepaid plans, we believe you can unlock new buyers in key markets. Let's quickly run through how prepaid plans work. First, the user purchases a plan, such as a 1 month of the basic tier or a battle pass, which gives them access for a fixed amount of time to content. Once the user has an active prepaid plan, they can then top up and extend their entitlement expiration, either in-app or from the Google Play Subscription Center. From there, the user can then continue to top up and extend their plan indefinitely. Alternatively, if they like the experience, they can seamlessly switch to an auto-renewing subscription, which you may offer at a discounted price compared to the prepaid plan to get the user to switch. To manage these offerings, you can leverage the subscription tools available today, such as real-time developer notifications and the subscription API. The third product I'm going to walk you through today is Google Play Points. As I mentioned earlier, it is a reward program designed to reward users for purchases and engagement on Google Play. It's free of charge to join, and users can earn Play Points to exchange for special items and discounts in select games, or for Google Play credit to use on movies, books, games, and apps. With Google Play Points, users can earn points on almost everything they buy with Google Play, including in-app products, movies, books, subscriptions, and more. Weekly points events can further boost their earn rate. Google Play Points has 4 to 5 levels depending on which country the user is in. Users' levels are determined by how many points they have collected, and higher levels will offer perks like weekly prices. We have partnered with select developers to onboard high-quality content so that users can exchange points for special in-app products like characters, gems, and more. Users can also use Play points for Google Play credit. Play Points was first launched in 2018 as a reward program designed for high spenders. Afterwards, we launched another 6 waves of market expansion to a total of 27 markets across APAC, North America, and EMEA. We believe emerging markets are our next biggest opportunity with a fast-growing mobile gaming population. Starting from Q4 2021, we will expand our program to Indonesia and other emerging markets. In emerging markets, we will introduce a program designed with local users in mind, including customized tiers, more engagement features, and localized visual and copy. When we first launched the program 3 years ago, we hypothesized that we would be able to add value to developers in 3 different ways. Number 1, access to highly qualified users. Number 2, reduction of churn of your high spenders. Number 3, increase of revenue from Google Play. The great news is that the program has shown an ability to create sustainable business impact across geos. Today, for many developers, over 50% of their game spend comes from PlayPoints members. We look forward to partnering with more developers like you to build the best experience for our users. Next, I'll be introducing you to Nimrod, who will talk you through on how to win in emerging markets. Over to you, Nimrod.
Thank you so much, Elena. So my name is Nimrod, a difficult name to pronounce, I know. I'm based in Israel, in the city of Tel Aviv, and I work with game developers such as yourself, and helping some developers to penetrate the Middle East and Turkey region. In the next few minutes, we will talk about how to win in emerging markets. I will share some best practices that are relevant for emerging markets, and I'll also share some thoughts around pricing in these markets specifically. I'd like to share with you a few of the best practices we collected here at Google Play from our experience working with developers expanding into new markets, specifically into emerging markets. So the obvious first point is to translate the game and the store listing into the local language. Yes, in some markets you can find success with the English version of the game, but in most markets it won't be relevant for the users. So it's not easy, it's sometimes difficult, it can be pricey, but the impact will be huge. Now the next point is around tailoring the live ops to the market local seasonality and holidays, like Carnival in Brazil or Ramadan in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. It can be from special content in the game that is around the holiday or the season. It can be limited time characters, and of course, having sales in the game. This can attract more users to install the app, increase the engagement of the current users, and increase sales. Now, another great way to build a strong local presence is to have special items and characters in the game. Now, not just around seasonality, it can be like something that you'll have throughout the year. Now, this is highly appreciated by the players. We have some examples, we have some examples in Mina when we see historical figures being introduced into the game. And this is highly, highly appreciated by the local players. Now, let's touch pricing for a second. Now, pricing is one of the biggest questions, one of the biggest challenges that you might have when going into a new market. But when you go into emerging markets, you have to understand the local purchase power of the people and adjust it accordingly. Now, this is why we have in most of the emerging markets sub-dollar pricing that will allow you to price different items or packs even below $1. Although it might feel too low, it will actually allow you to convert much more players into first-time payers. This is something that we will also touch in the next slide. Now, in terms of partnering with local partners, this is something that can have a really big impact. Here at Google Play, we work with local payment partners like e-wallets or gift cards resellers, and also telco companies where we have direct carrier billing. Many of them would be extremely happy to amplify your ongoing sales. For example, we do quite a lot of this work around Ramadan in the Middle East. And they will also be happy to support major game launches across their websites, social media, and even doing co-marketing. Now, another important best practice is to engage with your users in their local language. It can be in the customer support, replying to concerns of the users. It can be replying to reviews in the store listing, sorry, or even social media. This is actually becoming even more relevant as next month in November, we're actually going to move to market-based rating in the store, and replying to reviews can actually improve your rating as some users can update their rating based on your response. Now, local device optimization is a key. I really can't stress this enough. In emerging markets, you'll find a wide range of low to medium-end Android devices. Some are even unique only to this specific market. For example, in India, this is quite common. Now, you have to make sure that your game runs smoothly on these devices. Now, sometimes it can be a large number of devices. Now, another thing to pay attention to is the user experience, as some languages can be somewhat challenging when localizing and translating to. For example, Arabic is written from right to left, and you actually have to flip the entire UI, which can be tricky sometimes. Now, making sure you have a high quality experience in the game and in your chosen market is a key for your success. Now, the last thing is highly recommended: having a local office and presence. It makes things much easier when you have local people that understand the culture, the language, and how to operate in these markets, especially as you can have some regulations and legal requirements that can be different from what you are used to in other markets. Now, the last slide is just to really show you why your pricing strategy will be important in the success of your title in a market. As mentioned before, you should leverage the flexibility we have on Google Play with sub-dollar in most of the emerging markets. And here you can understand why. So what we did here is we took the prices of Spotify subscription and a Big Mac and compared it to the price of the same items in the US. Now, we can see that, for example, Spotify is 80% cheaper in Turkey than in the US. Now, a Big Mac in Malaysia, for example, will cost 60% less than the price of the same thing in the US. Now, it will be extremely difficult to convert a player into payer for the first time in a $5 starter pack when a monthly subscription to Spotify will actually cost the player less. Now, if Spotify and McDonald's price the same services or items differently in different countries, you should probably consider doing the same. So, I hope that you guys got a few good best practices that will help you win in emerging markets. And now, back to you, Drew.
Thanks, Nimrod. It's me again, back to facilitate today's panel. We just shared about winning in emerging markets and thought it would be great to hear from our import specialists on the front lines to get some deeper insights regarding expansion into these regions. Basically, I will be asking questions to our panelists, and they will be sharing thoughts about different topics. Please feel free to add your own questions to Slido if this session inspires you to do so. So without further ado, nice to have Ash, Rogers, and Nimrod back with us. Hey guys, it would be great if you could quickly reintroduce the emerging markets you are covering for the audience. So Ash, you want to start it off?
Sure. Hi, Ju. So I cover India and Southeast Asia.
Great, thanks. Nimrod?
Hey, Ju. I cover the Middle East and Turkey.
Great. And Rogers?
Hello, Joe. I'm representing Latin America.
Great. So we have these wonderful regions covered. So I'll start off with the first question. So for some emerging markets, we frequently see a new breakthrough genre being the catalyst in driving the overall growth of the entire gaming market. Should devs focus on capturing opportunity in that genre, or should they try for a genre that is blue or ocean? And Rogers, can you kick us off with this one?
Certainly, yes. And this is an amazing question. It is true that in any given moment, one genre is going to be leading in engagement and monetization. For Latin America, right now, that would be action games. It was preceded by strategy. If it was up to me, I would stick with using that as a data point, because what we know works best is making the games that our company know how to do great and having a great go-to-market strategy as well. It is a fact that many different people will want to play different games at any given moment. And in fact, the number 2 genre in Latin America right now is casual. It is a big contrast from the first one that is action. So basically, companies that are doing casual games in Latin America are also doing great. If your company has a strong suit in creating action games too, so go for it. But if it's not the case, don't sweat too much and just keep making great games.
Thanks. Ash?
Yeah, 100% agree with Rogers' points. Play to your strengths. India is a bit like Latin America in that today all the consumer spend is really in action. Does that mean that there are no RPGs in the top 10 grossing, mean there never will be? Of course not. At some point, a title will come along and make that breakthrough. Maybe it's from someone on this webinar today. These markets are evolving fast. They'll look very different and more diverse in a few years' time. That is the evolution we've seen in Southeast Asia, where users don't just play action games anymore. They're also happy to play and spend in strategy and RPGs. I think we'll see a similar trend in other emerging markets too.
Nimrod?
Hey, so I fully agree with my friends here. So we see the same in MENA, that the action category is the leading one now, and at the same time, we do see that some games are coming to the region and finding a huge success. So the fact that that action is popular doesn't mean that a casual title, for example, can be popular as well. You can also see it as an opportunity, as an untapped category, if you want, where you can actually have a major impact.
Right. So basically, devs should definitely take a look at their own strengths when they think about what genre they want to enter in these different emerging markets. Okay, so moving on to the next question, which is also a topic I think we get a lot of questions about, localization and culturalization. In our presentations today, we mentioned the importance of getting the quality of this right. So are there any examples you could share where this wasn't done well? How well, and also how well is English Western culture received in your respective markets? Nimrod, I'm going to pick on you first this time.
Thanks. So this is such an important question. As I see these challenges in my region quite frequently, even from some of the biggest developers in the world, they have quite a lot of struggles when it comes to localization and culturalization. So in MENA, the localization challenge is even bigger than most other regions, just because Arabic is actually written from right to left. So in order to localize the game, you actually have to flip the entire UI. But this is not just around flipping the UI, and Rogers and Ash can probably add more. We see usage of wrong currency symbols. We sometimes see direct translations from English to Arabic or to Turkish that doesn't make any sense in the local language. And when you invest in localizing a game, and it can be quite pricey, you have to make sure you go with a recommended agency that will do so if you're not doing it internally, and try to have other people, native speakers, and as many as you can, to actually QA the game. I would highlight that now, as Play is moving to local rating for specific markets, this is even more important as poor localization can actually result in a low rating for a specific country if the user experience is low.
Rogers, what's it like in Latin America?
Well, in Latin America, things are certainly simpler than in MENA because two languages cover pretty much all the region. However, I must say, we do see really common mistakes still being made, like using Portuguese in the region or Spanish from Spain. And English literacy is less than 5%, so you really can't rely on it alone.
All right. Ash, tips for India and Southeast Asia?
So in India, you can get by with English today. It is starting to change, though, and you will need Hindi in a few years' time. SEA, on the other hand, is much more complicated. You need Thai, Bahasa, and Vietnamese. Those three languages are absolutely critical. Southeast Asia languages are thankfully left to right. But other than that, totally agree with all of the points that Nimrod and Rogers made.
Right. So it seems like for emerging markets, when you pay attention to localization, there are specific sort of tactics that you should consider for the particular region that you are looking at. Another area that our devs think about a lot are using IPs in games. So are there types of IPs that are received better or worse than others in your regions? Ash?
Yeah, great question, Ju. So let me start with India since it's much simpler. Indians are not familiar with IPs from China, Japan, or Korea. I don't want to say they won't accept these IPs because honestly, they just don't know. They don't know IPs like Pokemon or BTS or Three Kingdoms. On the other hand, they love Indian IPs and Western IPs. Some examples of Indian IPs, would be Carom, Ludo, and Teen Patti. These are very popular local board and card games, all of which have now become super successful mobile games. But it's not just Indian IPs, though. Despite the thriving local movie industry in India, the highest grossing movie in India in history is Avengers Endgame. And even the success of games like Free Fire and PUBG Mobile or BGMI also speak to Indians' acceptance of Western-looking IPs. Southeast Asia, on the other hand, is much more receptive to all IPs, in particular IPs from China, Japan, and Korea. Many Southeast Asian countries also have a legacy of PC gaming, and that means there's a lot more familiarity with PC gaming IPs as well.
Great. Nimrod, what's it like in MENA?
First of all, I just want to say that Ludo is actually really big in MENA right now. But besides that, similar to India, many people are not familiar with the IPs coming from APAC, mostly like the ones like the Chinese, Korean, or Japanese ones. Sometimes we do see an IP which is known. For example, the Japanese title Captain Tsubasa by K-Lab is actually known as Captain Majid in the region, and it's really popular. Besides that, Western IPs are known and are popular across the MENA region.
Great, thanks. Rogers?
Well, in LATAM, there is a high rate of acceptance of IPs from both Western and Eastern markets, at least the most popular ones. I should say that associating with IPs is probably less important than in other regions. It's not a requirement at all. but certainly well received for both game storyline or just specific events.
Yep. So from our import experts, we see that IPs can definitely help, but you should definitely check out, when you decide on the region that you're entering, how the IPs are received in these different emerging markets. Okay, so now we'll move on to sort of question about live ops. The importance of live ops events catered towards local holidays was also emphasized today. What are the specific ones we should be looking out for in your regions? And are there any examples of this executed well? Let's start with Mina, Nimrod.
For sure. So, of course, Ramadan is the main one celebrated across the Muslim world. So, MENA, Turkey, and some countries in APAC, like Malaysia and Indonesia. And Ramadan is a month-long holiday, and it is usually the highest in revenue as people are spending more time at home. Now, throughout the month, we do see developers running many sales and special activities within the game itself, like limited time characters or themes. I would also highlight that you should avoid showing food and beverages during the month of Ramadan, as people will fast during the day and will eat only during the night. So just like be sensitive. Besides that, another big holiday is Eid al-Adha. This time it's just 3 days festival, nothing too long, which is mostly around the theme of giving and helping people in need. So we do see developers doing a lot of offline activities as well on top of the special live ops, and they will support charities and leveraging that with their PR. Now, as Muslim holidays are based on the lunar calendar, this is different each year. This year specifically, Ramadan is in April and Eid is in July. Besides the Muslim ones, I would say that Western holidays like Halloween or New Year are relevant as well. And this will be relevant in most markets. I would say like probably the only one which is a bit different is Saudi, which is a bit more sensitive, I would say.
Okay, got it. What's it like, Rogers, or Latin America?
Well, the biggest regional holiday in Brazil is Carnival, and it's very well known, happens around February or March, varies a little bit every year. Many people prefer to actually stay at home instead of partying and just relaxing and playing. So that is a good one. Still in Brazil, Festa Junina, June's party, it's a big festivity and it's not widely used by game companies so far. This year, Garena with Free Fire did a very nice event for Festa Junina, and they did prioritize Brazil, which was a very smart move. In Mexico, people celebrate Day of the Dead instead of Halloween, and they happen at the same time. Other than those, just to drive sales, I would stick to common strong retail dates like Black Friday, which sometimes people save for a whole month just in order to spend in that specific day expecting discounts, myself included.
Okay, thanks for the tip. Ash?
Gosh, India has hundreds of festivals, but there are two key holidays that I recommend everyone focus on, which are Holi, which is the Festival of Colors, and it's earlier in the year, March or April, and Diwali, Festival of Lights, that's later in the year, October or November. The dates vary a little year by year. On the Southeast Asia side, I'd say there's three. There's Lunar New Year, earlier in the year, January or February. And then in Thailand specifically, you've got Songkran around April, and Indonesia, Malaysia, Ramadan, as Nimrod already talked about. We actually published a post on Medium with some great executions of each of these. I really liked what 8-Ball Pool had done for Holi and Diwali in India.
Great. So we're not expecting, all of you to remember all these holidays, but we just wanted to let you know that definitely taking advantage of the local holidays in the markets that you're focusing on is a great time to sort of boost your live ops and other activities. Okay, moving on to the next question for you guys. So engaging with the local gaming communities is also considered important for many markets, and devs are interested in this. Do you still see offline events worth pursuing post-COVID, or would it be wise to plan for online events only? And another question is it common to hold events looking after sort of the HVUs in your markets? Ash, over to you.
Sure. So it's not very common to hold events for top spenders only. Spending in India and Southeast Asia it's not very concentrated. There really aren't a whole lot of whales. Offline events are definitely worth pursuing post-COVID. You know, anyone who's been to an esports event in Bangkok or Jakarta or Delhi, can tell you the energy is just off the charts. I personally can't wait for those to come back. But unfortunately, vaccination rates in our part of the world are still pretty low, and post-COVID, maybe a little bit further away than in the rest of the world. So in the meantime, I definitely focus on online only.
Got it. Nimrod, what's it like in your region?
So I would say it's somewhat similar to what Ash just mentioned, and because this is also not really common to host events or initiatives for top spenders, although you can find many whales, and mainly in the Gulf countries. On the other hand, esports is actually becoming quite big and becoming more popular in the region, and we do see events planned in markets like UAE, where they're actually the government is sponsoring the tournament.
I see. Rogers?
Well, seeing game companies physically present at events sends a powerful message, right? That this company cares about the region. But I wouldn't also reserve the majority of the budget for those events, knowing also that many players are spread across the region and wouldn't be able to actually attend those events. Digital events can be more inclusive and certainly will also have a very positive effect. It is certainly not common as well in Latin America to hold events for top spenders. Going for the masses probably aligns better.
Right. So as COVID is sort of at different stages in different regions, sort of offline events people could plan for, but perhaps holding online events and planning well for those would be well received in these regions. Okay. Along sort of these lines, when devs think about how to sort of market and make their game, the awareness greater in these regions, are influencers popular? And would it be better to work with an influencer that has mass appeal, so sort of a pop star or actor, or someone that is well known amongst the gaming community? Rogers, you think about this one?
That is a great question. And yes, influencers are massively popular in Latin America. In fact, according to Statista, the power of influence of influencers is the biggest in Brazil. That is also true for Latin America. People tend to follow, to admire those influencers, content creators, or just personalities, taking into consideration what they do, what they buy, what they consume, and of course, what they play. So working with them can be very strategic. Choosing between working with a popular personality like a singer that does not normally play versus working with a mobile player, streamer that is very specific depends on overall objective. Let me explain. Well, imagine that you are launching an RPG game in Latin America and you do have an influencer that plays RPGs on a stream. So that is very specific and has lots of synergy. It can be very laser focused audience for you to really launch the game, get some engaged players, and even convince the players that they should maybe switch to your game instead of their current favorite one. However, that singer could possibly have like 10 to 20 times more followers than the streamer. So just spreading the word, generating visibility and awareness of your game can also work really well there, attracting huge crowds and curious players to your game. So if it was up to me, I would start with the influencer, being very specific, launch the game, drive some initial engagement, and maybe in a later moment, just think about working with the personality as well, just to generate that effect. Well, did you see who is playing our game? Because that can also be a really strong factor in the region.
Great. So it's a very sort of devised strategy there. Thank you. Ash, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, so Rogers' answer could have been for India and Southeast Asia too. India and Southeast Asia are crazy about influencers, but very much local influencers. Sometimes global influencers, let's say PewDiePie, may not be super well known, but there are local influencers. So Just No Limit in Indonesia, who only does gaming content in Bahasa, has 23 million subscribers. Techno Gamers does content in English and has 21 million subscribers. Now, those are some of the biggest and best known, but there are also many influencers with 1 million or 2 million loyal subscribers that are a great way for you to introduce your game to local gamers and start to build that community. In terms of working with gaming influencers versus non-gaming influencers, I think either can work. It really depends on what your objective is. If you want to go mass market, maybe you work with non-gaming influencers. But if you really want those hardcore gamers, then gaming influencers would definitely be the way to go.
Got it. Nimrod, is it looking any different in MENA?
I want to say yes, but no. It's so no surprise. The influencer marketing is big in the Middle East, and actually it's getting bigger all the time, especially in the last year and a half, I would say. We see both local and international developers working with influencers, with local influencers, to improve their marketing efforts. In some cases of local developers, up to 50% of their marketing budget in the region is spent on influencers marketing, sometimes even more. We see that gaming influencers are highly popular, and some of them are known across the region. Mainly the ones coming from the biggest countries like Saudi or the wealthier countries like UAE, and these influencers can really build a strong reputation for a game, especially if it's a new one. And at the same time, we can also see local celebrities that are popular as influencers and not as gamers, and they can support the marketing efforts. And many of them are known across the entire region.
Great. So with influencers, basically the first is to think about what your objective is, and then based on that, you can decide whether you want to go with a more mass appeal influencer or someone that is more well-known and has influence amongst gamers. Okay, this question I think is one where we talked about a lot during our session today, including what sort of Google Play is also preparing in these areas. So the question is, lowering payment hurdles and localized pricing was discussed. Could you speak a little bit more about how this works and the benefits in your markets? So Ash, let me hand it over to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Shu. I love talking about this topic. Yes, getting users to spend in games has been a big bottleneck in emerging markets. There are a number of reasons this bottleneck exists. Number one, many users, can't pay. That is, they don't have a form of payment that's accepted on Play. And, that's really Play's problem to fix. And I hope, a lot of the folks on this call agree, we've done a lot here in the last 3 or so years. I'm not going to try and say the issue is solved. It's not. And we've got to keep investing here for sure. But then there's also the second reason why this bottleneck exists. And that's really when, users can pay, but choose not to because they don't see value. And this one is, I'd say much more in the hands of the developer. And I think this is a situation, many developers find themselves in, where the user needs to spend, $10 or even $30 in the game just to get into it, just to make a single transaction. And then developers see no one from emerging markets is buying, and their assumption is, that users in emerging markets just don't spend on games, or they don't have money. But that's just not true. We've seen these two very successful emerging market specific strategies. The first being sub-dollar pricing, basically taking your existing SKUs, 100 gems at $1 and chopping it up into smaller units, 40 gems for 50 cents. And that really helps to, unlock users who have less disposable cash. And the second one is localized pricing. That's taking the same 100 gem for $1 SKU and selling it for 60 cents in emerging markets, because emerging markets users have relatively lower purchasing power. I think we all know these strategies carry risks of arbitrage or player backlash, so they shouldn't be embarked on lightly. But what we have seen is that the rewards are there for the developers trying to figure this stuff out.
Great. Thanks for the thorough explanation. Imrad, I'm sure you have a strong answer as well. Up to you.
I can speak about pricing for hours. So if you have the time, I'm here to stay. So from my experience, we see different types of pricing strategies from our developers. So one is that the game pricing is global. So for example, in Egypt, the price would be the same as in the US. And as discussed before in my piece earlier, we need to have the purchasing power in mind. So this is a tricky approach. In some cases, there is a good reason behind it of keeping a global strategy, like for SLGs or turn-based games, where the developer would be afraid of arbitrage, as Ash said, but also just to give an unfair advantage to some players that can influence the game and the game balance. This is a valid one, I can understand, but at the same time, a developer can justify selling different packages or offer a sale in a few ways. So one is to package it around a local event, like a local holiday. So it would be one time off, but can still find many new players. Not changing the packs in the in-game store, just one time special offer for a few days. The second option is to sell vanity items and not currency that would impact the balancing of the game. In the Middle East, I would say, let's call it showing off. There is a word in Arabic, but let's call it showing off, is a big, big thing. And players would pay a lot for vanity items, especially in the Gulf countries. So if it would be like on avatars, if it would be just like weapons that just do good but don't do more damage, or even just like a golden circle around their name. Now, another strategy is to have a one-time offer or a starter pack, which will be low, but there is no continuity plan in mind for the next purchase. So the next offer would be the global pricing. Now, this is something that we see quite a lot, and I would say that usually it won't be the most successful one, because imagine a user paying 60 cents and the next offer would be $3. Now, this is a psychological gap or even a financial gap that just would be too difficult for the players to bridge, and many of them will stop paying after the first purchase. Now, try to work on an offer flow or a continuity plan that will enable and motivate the player to become an actual payer and not just a one-time off payer. Now, lastly, I would like to share two pro tips. The first is that not all emerging markets are the same. So if you go sub-dollar in Morocco, for example, in Saudi or UAE, you can stick with $1. There is no need to pick one price that would be the same for all emerging markets or all markets in the same region. Now, the second thing is to remember that your players play other games. Now, when your games start with a $3.99 starter offer, for example, but other games that the users are playing will offer sub-dollar or even 99 cents, it will be difficult for you to drive them to purchase.
Right. Nimrod, you're right. You really do love this topic. Okay, Rogers, we want to give you a chance here as well.
Yes, well, I totally agree with what has been said already. I want to add 2 points to the discussion here. So first, even though inevitably different people in different regions are going to have various amounts of income, everybody has the need for entertainment, right? It just makes us happy. So how much a player will spend in a game is not only a factor of income, but also how much the percentage of the income that this person is willing to spend in entertainment. In my market, I see that many people, even lower income populations, are spending a lot in entertainment. But sometimes they're just going to the movies, going to a cafe, and not necessarily shifting that budget to mobile games. So basically, just now realizing that they would be willing to spend in games as well, instead of just buying a coffee. Having items that are not too expensive in a game can just remove the hurdle of that first purchase. And this is certainly the most difficult point in converting a user to a paying user, but it's something that a good game will easily do. The second point is in forms of payments. Letting users know that they are able to pay with their favorite form of payment is actually really strong. And partnering with us from Play and local payment providers just to spread the message can be really helpful into driving users to convert and drive up our conversion rates, of course.
Thank you. So I think this topic is really important to us as it is to you who are joining us today. So, we realize that it's really difficult to think about a localized strategy, especially when you're trying to service a global game. But we do think that, removing sort of the hurdles for that first purchase, especially for new gamers, is important. And that, we are also working hard to continue to sort of expand the payments side so that our users have access to your games and can, pay in the most convenient form for them. Okay, so before we move into the general Q&A, and I hope that our listeners, the devs that are joining us today, have been leaving questions on Slido. But I wanted to give our panelists a chance to leave us with a piece of golden advice. So we've covered a lot of content today, but what is one thing you want attendees to take with them from today? Nimrod, you get the first shot.
Cool. A golden tip. It's I hope it will be good enough. I already covered it, but always have in mind that emerging markets cannot be treated with one strategy only. So each can have different needs, different player habits, and should have, no surprise, different pricing strategy.
Right. Great. Nice and short and to the point. Okay, Rogers.
Well, at this point, we know that emerging markets are not only a secondary revenue stream for companies. In fact, for many companies, emerging markets are actually top markets. But we so frequently see that companies are trying to adapt their games from mature markets to emerging markets. So my advice here comes almost as a challenge. Maybe it's time for us to start creating games for emerging markets instead of adapting them. It does sound to me that adapting a game to mature markets is way easier. So I have a feeling that in a couple of years, when we meet again, we're going to be talking about the companies that did follow this approach.
Got it. Thank you. And Ash?
So speaking to our audience, I'd say, many of you would have seen the steady growth in mobile gaming in the early 2010s in China. And some of you, would have decided to wait and see. And we all know kind of how that's turned out. And I think now what I hear from many game developers is that it's hard to catch up. It's hard to enter the market and be strong today. So, basically I'd say don't make that same mistake in emerging markets. The time to really get stuck in, it's now.
Right. So I think, we're basically saying emerging markets are here, the opportunity is here, and we really want to work with you to make it happen for you. Please, we hope that this session sort of leaves you with those thoughts. And so with that, I think we're going to move on to the Q&A session, where I'm hoping that you have left questions for us. And we'll also be joined again by Hemin, who also presented in today's session. So see you soon. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Now we're going to host the Q&A session, as we had announced at the beginning of this session. And let me bring back the panelists from today. So Rosh Ashnell, Nimrod, and Hemin, here back with us. And I know you have been been very busy leaving us with questions on Slido. So let us just get straight to the point and go to the Slido screen. Okay, so let me start with the first question. Could you share more about the cosine similarity countries grouping? And the Gary has said, it's probably not in absolute value, but more of similarity in growth trend. So Hemin, I'm going to ask you to sort of address this. Thanks.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for the question. The cosine similarity looks at how the data is just distributed rather than growth itself. So it looks at all the data of user engagement in terms of play minutes and spending amount and frequency, and determine how much these data patterns are similar to each other.
Okay, hope that answers the question. The second question is, does the store ranking change quite often? And for this one, I'm going to ask Rogers how it looks like for LATAM.
Okay, good question. Well, short answer is no. We don't see lots of variations in top 5, maybe top 10, but it's not rare for us to see new titles just showing up in top 12, top 15, and maybe they sometimes will get established as one of the top titles regionally. But it's certainly not often. It happens maybe twice a year, yearly, for us to really see a title stick there. But it's difficult.
Okay, so just to get one other view, I'm going to also ask Nimrod to see if this is any different in MENA. So Nimrod, does the store ranking change quite often in your region?
I really wanted to give a different answer, but to be fair, it's the same. We don't see too many changes too often. Usually, the ones that are leading the charts and the rankings are there to stay for quite some time. But yeah, every now and then we can see, for example, a new game launch that is picking up quite quickly. But as Roger said, like it's more in the top 10 and less in the, let's say, in the top 3.
Got it. Thank you, Nimrod. Okay, moving on to the next question from Diang. Do you have data from community sentiment? So for example, game reviews from users, negative or positive, and do we track common issues from each category? I think Hemin, maybe, do we have that? Are we tracking that in the growth consulting team?
No, it's yes. Sorry. We only look at in-game data for now, but we will definitely consider this in the future to better provide consultation for us, for you guys. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for titles, like you obviously are looking at your store listing and on the game ratings and the comments there. And we do recommend that you address those, if possible, leave the responses in the local languages, because that sort of is an added touch that the users like. But currently, as Hemin mentioned, we aren't actually tracking this like on an aggregated basis, but we can consider that for the future. All right. Let me move to the next question. So how to localize price and avoid unfair advantage. So the example left is that the Spotify case seems to work because of different local music, but it's difficult to differentiate the game content. And for this one, I'm actually going to go to Ash.
Thanks, Ju. So I'd say probably two things. One is you can choose to localize pricing for either functional items, which actually give you an advantage in the game, or cosmetic items which don't. And so for sure, focus on cosmetic items, because then you don't have this issue of unfairness. But the second point I'd make is, I think when it comes to functional items as well, I kind of feel like, let's say you have to get a character to clear a certain level. and that character costs like $10 in the US, and the equivalent in Indonesia will be significantly higher, right? So it'll be quite hard for an Indonesian gamer to afford that $10 equivalent. It's not so hard in the US. So isn't that unfair, right? Isn't that unfair that it's easier for the American consumer to be able to get the item in cleared level that users in other markets are not able to get to, which is why we think having that same item priced at something that is more affordable for the user in emerging markets is actually fair.
Okay. I think that's an added perspective, I think. And since this topic is something that we also discuss a lot, let me also throw this question to Rogers regarding sort of the localized price and how to avoid the unfair advantage.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is. I have to agree with Ash. Sometimes it's not actually unfair, but it's unfair to not have price parity. So I also want to differentiate here. If it's cosmetic, usually it's fine to just localize prices immediately. But if it's not, if it's a competitive game, what the first question we need to ask us is, can we just isolate players in different servers, different regions, so they don't actually compete with each other and in a way that we could consider unfair for one side or another. If that is possible to be done, this is about price parity, purchase power, and it would probably make sense to just localize the prices anyway, even if the items are not only cosmetic. And I consider we wouldn't be giving users an unfair advantage, and we also are protected that users are not going to try to just change items from one server to another one.
Right. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next question, and I think this one already has an owner because it specifies the region. Would like to know if SEA game players have a positive attitude towards competitive games and apps. So Ash, this one's for you.
Thanks, Stu. Yeah, absolutely. If you look at what are the most popular games, the top grossing games, they're all competitive games like Free Fire and Mobile Legends, Bang Bang, and PUBG Mobile. So I think no question, Southeast Asia game players love competitive games.
Right. Okay. Alrighty. Next question. Which type of in-game sales items are popular? New characters, cosmetics, boost items, and what way of sort of selling them are successful? So is it like through loot box or more of a direct purchase? And this one I'm going to ask Nimrod to help answer.
That's a really good question. So I think like even in the MENA region, for example, we do see differences. So for example, if in the like countries like Egypt, Morocco, and so on, like the countries that drive the scale of users, less of the monetization, I would say, there usually will see more of progression sales and less on the items. In the Gulf countries, and we see a lot of users spend a lot of money on items, just like to really give like their for example their like their avatars some boosters or some upgrades, and even just like in a way to show off, to show that they have the money to spend. And how it works, I would say like a lot of it is coming from special offers tied to like live ops and so on, but also direct purchases.
Right. Okay. And for LATAM, is it looking any different, Rogers?
Well, fortunately, this year we have run user research in the region, and we could see clearly that pretty much in every country, characters are the most popular item that people want to buy. And they don't even need to be more powerful. They sometimes can just be a skin, and it's gonna sell well. Usually we see that people like to buy the in-game currency, and decide what they want to purchase in the game. Don't buy directly like this costs $1.99. And for just a little bit of edge, direct purchases are going to be better than loot boxes, but both work well in Latin America.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question also has an owner. How appealing are MMO games in Vietnam? And that one's to Ash.
Great to get so many questions for Southeast Asia. So, MMO games are very popular all across Southeast Asia. I think Vietnam's no exception. If anything, Vietnam, is one of the slightly more hardcore countries given the legacy of PC gaming. It's a very strong legacy of PC gaming. So yes, it's a great market for MMOs.
Okay, thank you for the clear answer. All right, next question. Are there any legal or cultural regulations the developer needs to be careful before releasing the game? So for example, a female character's outfit or loot box. So for legal regulations, we recommend that you consult, your company's legal team. But for the cultural ones, let me direct this question to Nimrod, since MENA is probably the most conservative region on this front. So Nimrod, off to you.
Conservative is the right word. So even within the region, we see some countries being more conservative, Saudi leading the side of more conservative. But even there, I would say we don't see too many games making changes within the game, having a different version of the game to be more conservative. But I would say paying more attention to the ads creatives, to the store listing there, we would see less exposed females, drugs, alcohol, things like that. I do want to say that if you have some, let's say, content around let's say anything related to let's say LGBTQ or a lot of exposed female characters, just pay attention to the reviews. Try to understand the sentiment of the community from social media and so on, just to be careful, to know what is going on. But overall, I would say again, within the game itself, we don't see too many changes. It's just the more of the marketing side.
Right, and maybe the aesthetics of the game, the way it looks. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Nimrod. All right, I'm going to move to the next question. Is there a best month or timing to launch my game or app? And which age group should I target for MMO games? So a lot of questions regarding MMO. I think this would vary by market, but let me first go to Rogers in LATAM.
Great question. Well, launching always as soon as possible, in my opinion. But, well, for MMO age groups, they will be very successful from the 18 plus up to 50 years old. So I wouldn't be too concerned about selecting the target age. I would expect a little more success from 25 to 45 years old in Latin America, at least for MMOs. And maybe if you can choose, if it works for you, I would try to launch on vacation time, which is basically from the end of year time after Christmas, so end of December, all the way until Carnival, that is around the end of February. Because usually people are going to have more time to spend in your game, and because it's a strong retail moment. So lots of people are going to be purchasing cell phones, sometimes powerful ones, and they can download your game first.
Got it. Thanks. And Ash, I'm going to ask specifically for India, because I don't think we've received too many questions regarding India. So how would it apply for India in this case?
So I think for India, in terms of the ideal timing, it might be a little bit similar to what Roger said. It's towards the end of the year, actually right about now. Starting October, we get into the festival season with Dussehra and then Diwali in early November. And that kind of continues through till the end of the year. people are getting new phones and trying new games. They have more time off, so that's a great time to launch. In terms of age group, I think similar to what Nimrod said, I think it'll be probably like 25 to maybe 35. It's not super young, it's not super old, somewhere in the middle.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next question. So, UA campaigns are relatively expensive in mature markets. Is it safe to assume that marketing costs would be lower in emerging markets? Nimrod, I'm going to go to you for Mina.
So although this is not our side of the business and the ad side, um, I yes, like it is of course cheaper. It's also, by the way, specifically in MENA, it's actually an opportunity because towards the end of the year, when we see like massive CPI increase in most Western markets, because this is not the holiday for the region, there are not a lot of changes in the CPI itself. So even towards the end of year, like the CPI in MENA stays pretty much stable or increasing, but not too much. It is cheaper. It's also from the influencer side, which is again highly popular in the region. Influencers will just cost less.
Right. So yeah, definitely you should consider these markets when you think about entry. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. Today's discussion mentioned many gamers in emerging markets as first-time gamers on mobile, but is there an existing big core gaming segment as well? And with this one, I'm going to go to Latam, to Rogers first.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, but it looks to me that the answer is a big yes. Not only, well, lots of people are playing on mobile for the first time, but we have everything, like people playing for the first time in every single segment, but we also have lots of people that used to play on PC long time ago, and they nowadays play on mobile. Myself, for example. And the card game community is extremely huge. So I wouldn't be too concerned if this question is in regards to setting an audience or an expectation for how those players can behave. I would be very at ease with it.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I think we are almost at the end of the session. I think we'll take like maybe 2 or 3 questions. So I'm going to quickly move to the next question. Are pay-to-win games accepted in your markets? And Ash, what does it look like for Southeast Asia and India?
Yeah, so actually, I'd say different answers. In India, the answer is not yet. We don't really see any particularly successful pay-to-win games. Southeast Asia, very different. Yes, there is a sizable pay-to-win segment. Especially, MMOs, strategy games. Yeah, that works in SEA.
Okay, thank you. Next question. So what game genre appeals to the age group to 40 to 45? So I'm assuming that because we mentioned that a lot of the emerging market gamers are younger, what maybe this might look like for an older demographic. And maybe Nimrod, I go to you first on this one.
I'm trying to think if the person who asked that consider 40 to 45 as the older group, because I'm getting close to it. So
Sorry,
I think
I shouldn't have said older. I'm sorry.
I think the overall, it's safe to assume that 40-45 is actually like in a very good place. Like it's the one that has like the money to spend, and it's the generation that grew up more with like video games. So similar to what we'll probably see like in other countries, yes, we do have some countries that are Like the 4045 will be not so popular, again, like the ones that don't really have like the access to technology or like to the high-end phones, and so on. So there we will usually see, for example, in MENA more like popular genres like card games, things like that. When it comes to the younger generation in MENA, we'll see like more of like basically everything. We'll see them like playing everything. We do see that action games, strategy games, RPG games are the one that are really leading the charts.
Okay, thank you for the thorough answer. All right, I'm going to go with the last question for the day, which is also specific to a region. So Rogers, you're gonna get this one. So besides payment options, methods, and economy, what are the other barriers you consider gamers from LATAM are facing for in game purchases overall?
Let's see. Payment options, methods, and economy, other barriers. Barriers for purchase, they talk about payment options and economy. We could see a little bit of cultural differences. Like it took a little bit of time for people to accept a little better gacha and loot boxes in Latin America, but has been at least 4 or 5 years since that is not a problem anymore. And sometimes I'm going to talk about what usually works well as many companies, when they didn't see of the same items that they see selling in other markets selling so well in Latam, they tried launching like local characters and things that are specific to the region. And those actually were the breakthrough for the games, making a big difference. So I'm not going to say, you pretty much mentioned the most important barriers, that is payment options and economy. And just to mention one more, is social is important. So people like to play what the others are playing. And if the game is meant to be played completely alone, that may also become a barrier, because people may just migrate to the games their friends are playing as well.
Got it. Thank you. I think there might have been some questions that we were not able to address in the time. And if you had left your name or some function for us to get back to you, I think we'll try to do that. But with that, I want to thank all the panelists that joined us from different hours in different time zones. So thank you guys. Okay, thanks. All right. And with that, I also wanted to thank you for taking time from your day to join us. So as always, we would love to hear your feedback. We take your comments very seriously and use them to improve our approach. It'll only take you 2 minutes to fill out the form, and that will probably show a little bit later on the screen. And we also stressed the importance of localization, culturalization today. And there's an opportunity for you to nominate your title for localization review in the feedback form. So please leave remarks there, and you can specify the language that you would like to be reviewed. And if your title is selected, then we will conduct the review and get a report back to you. Also, we have good news that we've been recording today's session. So if you missed some parts, we will be posting it on the Go Global Hub, which is where you are watching this now. And you can also share links with your colleagues or rewatch different segments as you choose to do so. Also, you're probably wondering about other Go Global events. So with sad news, this will be our last Go Global event in 2021, but we will be sending out surveys in November to probably collect your feedback about the overall way that we do this. And we will probably have a 2022 event plan calendar that shows up at this same Global Hub site. And also our 2022 event format will probably be digital, but we will continue to review sort of the Corona status, and then hopefully we'll be able to see you in offline events soon. Okay, thanks for your attention and partnership. We will sign off now. Please do the survey for us. I hope you all have a great morning, day, evening, wherever you are. Take care and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.